collects everything from Millbrook and the town of Washington, Mabbittsville, Bengal, in the surrounding areas. We're primarily interested in documents, letters, things that have to do with your family if you've lived here for a long time. We'll get into this in a few minutes because this is from just one family here in Millbrook and the surrounding areas. We also collect postcards. We collect smaller items. We're really running out of space in the basement of the Village Hall, which is right over here on 35 Merritt Avenue. The other things that we do is we're taking all of these materials and putting them into conservation materials as they've mostly been in boxes and are deteriorating rapidly. So we're doing that sort of thing. And we're at the beginning to do, Linda is helping with the digitization and the data entry for the collection. Make sure you list who these people are, the dates if you have that kind of information. So
thank you.
I'll let you
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
One of the difficulties that we all have is that we take for granted what we know until we're not around. And then other people have the burden of trying to figure out what's a classic at the Society. To get a photograph, a wonderful photograph of an interesting person, and on the back of it, this was my grandmother. She was very, very old. And that's it. You know, whose grandmother and who wrote it? So that's the kind of thing. Consider documenting the backs of images, first name, last names. And the other thing that's so true is we may have a photograph of the Thorne Building, a postcard, and we think this is so precious. Well, guess what? That's the kind of thing that almost everyone would save. But if you have pictures of classmates doing something at the Thorne Building or outside, that becomes special. It's the individual photograph. And also, here's another example. The Eiffel Tower. We all know the Eiffel Tower? Well, the Eiffel Tower was dedicated in 1898, and that was the first postcard that was hugely popular. Everyone wanted a picture of the Eiffel Tower. But the images of the letters from people talking about going up in the Eiffel Tower, those are the ones that are precious, because that's the human touch for it. And the same thing happens, World War I. There are lots and lots of images of World War I, but it's the letters back and forth, the correspondence, the thank you notes. That gives a dimension to history that makes it very special. When we work with our students in 7th grade, part of our job is to get them thinking about what history is. History isn't just something in a volume, in a book, on a shelf. History is their history. And what we encourage our students to do is to go home and interview their grandparents or their great aunts and uncles to find out what it was like, how many horses, what was the first car, when did you get a television set, what was the program you watched. Those are the kinds of things we take for granted until in a twinkling of... The Historical Society is a repository, and it's made up of basically bits and pieces that people have. Sometimes we'll inherit a volume of images. Other times it could be a trunk of images. The same thing can happen. You may have something that you think is very special. We recently were asked if we would take a saddle, because the saddle had been in the family for a long time. Well, guess what? We don't have room for that kind of an item. And we encourage people, if you have a saddle, go to those places where saddles are going to be appreciated. It could be any one of the horse services that are around for it. So keep in mind the things that you have that you may take for granted that may be appropriate for society. And here's something else. What will happen and what we've done is you may have a very precious image that you don't want to give away, but you would share, and we can make copies of. So we can put the copy of that image in our collection so we have it. And there's so many images of fires in Millbrook, or parades in Millbrook, or destinations in Millbrook, the twinkling of an eye that are gone. But that photograph becomes so important. And here's an example of an image. Basically, it's a snapshot. We all know that term. Ask children today what a snapshot is. They won't have any idea what you're talking about. It's a snapshot. But what makes this snapshot special is this is a view of Millbrook, Front Street, where the fire department is now. And the person who took the snapshot had the presence of mind of labeling each of the buildings. So we have, in addition to this weird photograph, we have the notes on it. And the notes include things like Fuller, the shoes and Horton work, Potts Photo Shop, Rust's Moore's Hat Shop, Reardon Briggs, Grange Hall, Helen Boyce's, and Corner News, and so on. Each building is documented to the period. Now, the one that I want to talk about right now happens to be this curious little building with a number 2 on it. It's on wheels. And you think it's not there now. What was it? Well, it ended up being a photographer who had that as his photo darkroom studio, Potts. And in the 1860s, 1870s, he was one of the first photographers to document people in the village. And one of the images that's so wonderful is right up here it is. The cornet band. Can you see that? Later on, if you have a chance to walk and see. It's basically a volunteer band, cornet band, that was in parades and so on, and they were located where the firehouse is now. And you could imagine going, this is from the 1880s, 1890s on, to go and one night a week practice with your buddies, with the cornets and the drums, for parades and martial music. Having that image and realizing that image was in this portable photo shop. That's where the guys were all set up, crammed in to this little wagon that horses would have pulled around to take the views. That's the kind of fleeting moment that could be lost, but we're fortunate enough to have it documented. So, what are we looking at? How many of you have already gotten a calendar from the bank? Okay, well, I encourage you, if you have one, take more. Because this is the 24th calendar that we've done that has been underwritten by the bank. And every year we've documented local images, stories, and so on. And they become very, very collectible. Well, it just so happened that the descendant of one of the family that donated this collection, the Dunn collection, was obligated to clean out an attic of a house here. They had nothing to do with the community, but they were obligated to clean out the house so they could sell it. And looking through the attic, they found a stack of the calendars. And they contacted us saying, hey, we've got a lot of stuff. Are you interested in it? And Kathy, being Kathy, said, yes, yes, yes. So all of these were the result of having someone save the calendars to document it. So this year we are featuring images in the calendar from this collection. Now, a lot of you collect postcards. What is a postcard? What is a postcard? It's not a trick
Something
question.
that said for 1 cent.
Yeah, at 1 cent, you hit it, because mail, the first images were 1840s, and they were very, very rare, and they were individual ones. What happens is, by the 1880s and 1890s, and the Eiffel Tower is what really prompted it, suddenly everyone wanted postcards. And what happened in our government is it went from 2 cents to send a postcard to 1 cent. So for 1 cent, you could send a postcard image. Now, what were the ones that were really popular? Obviously, local businesses, houses, and so on. And we've got lots and lots of those. But something else happened. Chromolithography. What is chromolithography? It's inexpensive, colored printing. Chromolithographs. Think of things like Currier and Ives. Think of prints. And chromolithographs is a process that meant you not only had a postcard image, but it could be in color. Prior to that, what would happen is, and we've got examples, the card would be printed in black and white. And guess what, ladies? what would your job be if you were hired?
Watercolor.
Watercolor over the top. You'd watercolor them. And that was a livelihood. A lot of immigrants, women who didn't speak English, they would spend 12, 14 hours a day. Watercolor, 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 watercolor. With chromolithography, that technology changes. And by the 1890s, suddenly you can get cards in full color. Now, the calendar features cards that celebrate holidays and vocations. So when you look through it, but basically it's by the month. What is the holiday that's going to be celebrated on the card? But because of our limitations today, we couldn't do them in color. So we see them sepia. But look at these. Look at the color combinations. They were brilliant, these cards. And they were so popular, hugely popular. We'll talk about the images in just a minute. The color lithography and printmaking is an advance in the printing process that made postcards inexpensive, durable, and highly collectible. Do you know what the most popular postcard was? Here's a hint. Look to March. Look to March, for those of you who have it. Yes. It was St. Patrick's Day. Now, why was St. Patrick's Day so important? Irish. It's the Irish immigrants. This postcard, this holiday, St. Patrick's Day, is the first time that the Irish were accepted in this country. Why? Because everyone celebrated St. Patrick's. St. Patrick was universal. Because why? It's good luck, it's a new future, it's a beginning. Everyone wanted a four-leaf clover. Think of all the songs that we have. I'm looking over a four-leaf clover. No, I don't sing. I should have my do that. But what happens, this is the first postcard that would be sent for the holiday, but would be left up the entire year. You'd have it on the mantle because everyone wants good luck. That postcard did so much for the Irish community. Now, if you look at the other holidays, here's one that isn't really a holiday, but it's a celebration. For those who have the calendar, look to January. And that card is right up here. It's a postcard, and it has on the surface, this is an extraordinary card. It's an image of the Thorne Building. Now, the Thorne Building is so important. Why? Why was the Thorne Building important?
Education.
Education. And for the first time, it meant that you had an incentive. Kids would normally drop out. How old are you?
21.
21. Whoa, you would have, since you were 14, you would have been out of school. You'd be working, guaranteed. If not before that. What the Thorne Building ended up doing, the incentive was, you stay in school through the 12th grade, and guess what? You'll learn an occupation. That's the first time that happened. Our Thorne School is one of the first in New York State that taught sewing, cooking, masonry, carpentry, all the different skill sets. So if you stayed in school, you not only got a degree, you had a vocation, an occupation. So you could graduate and you could become a plumber. You could work with the plumbers. You had the skill. And ladies, you could sew, you could cook, you could do whatever because of that occupation. That's the Thorne Building, hugely important. So what happened was, if you were down a great distance from here, let's say you were in Lithgow, and the incentive was to come to the school, guess what? You would either come back and forth every single day from Lithgow, and how would you do it? If you were lucky, you had a horse. Otherwise, you'd have to walk. So guess what? Children from all the outlying regions ended up coming here and boarding for the week. Sunday night they'd come in, Friday night they'd go back home so that they could attend the school. Isn't that amazing? And what that did for the immigrant community here in the village, a lot of Catholic, a lot of the Italians, a lot of the Irish. They had rooms, boarding houses, so you could come, and you may have 3 or 4 boys in one room, but that meant that they didn't have to walk back and forth. And that's all part of our local history, things that we take for granted. This card is so important because in addition to the card with the Thorn building on it, there's a little cellophane envelope. And in the envelope are miniatures of locations in the village itself. And each of these became a big postcard as well. So for those of you who have the calendar, you will see it's going to be Edgewood, Halcyon Hall, the Friends Meeting House, the Crest, the Reformed Church. So these little mini images are in an envelope on that card. Isn't that novel? Guess what? It survived. How could that have survived? That's as fragile as anything. And guess what? At the Society, we have how many of them? We have 2 of them. So that meant whoever had that saved them because they were so precious. Now, looking at the other dates, and again, why don't I give you some, or Nan, why don't you give out calendars so everyone can have one to walk through it. Thank you, Nan.
So that's from here. You want more calendars here?
So again, look at the holidays and the obvious ones. January, there is that card with the individual views in it. Incredibly rare. Look to February. What's important in February? Valentine's Day, absolutely. So look at the card for Valentine's Day. And the chromolithography meant that they were in color. So here you can see the card itself. What a special treat to be able to have that. And then March, as we said, St. Patrick's Day, the 4-leaf clover, symbol of luck, good fortune for everyone. And April, what's in April?
Easter.
Easter, absolutely. Look at the images. Easter, because of the rebirth, because of the Easter egg, we take that for granted. The novelty of having eggs to celebrate, and chocolate eggs, whoa, what a treat. And look at the young couple of children, what they're doing, and all the flowers, because Easter is also the rebirth in spring. So the cards will celebrate that. Now, look at May. What's the difference? What is May? These are the novelty postcards the next few months of local scenes that make Millbrook so special. Does anyone know where that image was? Yes?
This is the card that interests me, so that's why I'm here. We're redoing the house on Stanford in 44. So this is the arch that's down there. I guess my question is, which direction is that arch taking a picture from, I guess is part of my question.
Yeah, it's going to be from south looking north, if you will, on the curve looking at it. And, okay, Nan disagreed with me. Nan, you have permission to say what you said.
I don't know, I think it looks like north-looking south.
Okay,
Having
so
climbed
whatever,
down there.
that's the card. Now, why is that arch so important, that bridge so important? In 1804, a group of entrepreneurs, including Philip Hart, got together and underwrote what? The Dutchess Turnpike. It was a turnpike, and it went from Poughkeepsie all the way to Sharon, Connecticut. And what it meant was, for the first time, you had a direct road from Poughkeepsie into Connecticut. Prior to that, how did you have to go?
Back roads.
Back roads, and wherever the water was the shallowest. So you would convolute yourself to get to a stream that you could cross. And what this did in 1804, 1805, they built arches so that the road could be basically straight. And the residue of that is still there under many of the pieces today. Today, we take 44 for granted. We don't even think about it. But think of what it meant. What did it mean for farmers? It meant that they could get their produce to Poughkeepsie. And what was in Poughkeepsie?
Railroad.
The railroad and also boats, the market. You could get it to many of the items that would go on to New York City or up to Albany, depending. So the railroad is what caused this area to become stabilized. And what happened was, a man by the name of Franklin Merritt convinced one of the local farmers to sell his farm to him. And what did Franklin Merritt do? He laid out the village, Franklin Avenue, Merritt Avenue. He had the ego to name the two main streets after himself. And he laid out the village and sold parcels. And why was it so successful? Because he had a good friend by the name of Brown, who was planning to put what through this community? The railroad. So he bought up the farm, laid out the village, the railroad comes through, and suddenly you have all the streets and the houses and the parcels. That's why we have Millbrook today. And again, next time you see Franklin Merritt, realize that's his name. History is basically,
I was
yes.
just gonna say, and Merritt gave the land for Thornville.
Oh, and the Merritts gave the land for the Thorn Building. That's why it's where it is. The Merritt Hall. And history is such an integration of details, coincidences, and happenstance, how things come together. So, fast forward. We received notice from this person who had to clean out an attic. And in the attic were all these things that they didn't want because they weren't really part of the Millbrook history. That it had, the property they were cleaning out had been a second wife that was 3 generations before. So the house came down in the family, but no one had any relation with the village. And in the attic were things like this. Postcards after postcards after postcards, images from the Dunn family, all of them, extraordinary numbers. And some of them, as collectors often do, are local buildings. So we did a presentation in 2011 on the postcards, the local views and images, because they were so important. Some, like the Thorn Building, there are thousands of those because so many people went there. But some of the vanity ones were done for individual houses, and they're the ones that are so special that we're looking for. This month, what we ended up deciding was, what about the other holidays? What about the color ones that are so important? What about the celebration of each of those events? And P.S., let's also do some of the local postcards that feature individual places and destinations. And here's a good example. If you look again at the calendar, look to July. How many of you know where this was? It is free.
But it's not,
Father and I used to go fishing.
Yeah.
the site of the Met House.
No. This was the original estate, which is part of what is Innisfree. And today, the descendant of Innisfree is what? Cary Arboretum with the associations. So this is an extremely important location because with the train, what would happen is people would come up, if they could afford it, and they would spend the summer holidays at the hotel. And why was that important? They had a lake, you could swim, you could boat, walking paths, which was all the rage at the time. So it became a really important location for it. And here you've got a postcard to celebrate it.
What feeds in Pleasant Valley?
Excuse me?
Was that an inn?
It was basically a boarding house. We should call it an inn, but it was really a boarding house. Basically, you would go there for the season. And they would have food and luncheons and parties and concerts as well. Now, the next one for August is what?
Bennett.
It became part of Bennett, absolutely. But this is the Millbrook Inn. And Millbrook Inn was really important because you would come up by train, and this is where you could stay in the village itself. And here's part of the amazing thing. This is the first location where if you were Italian coming up, you could stay. Because no one wanted to have anything to do with Italians. If you thought Irish were bad, Italians were worse. And why? They smelled. Why? Garlic. They used garlic. No one used garlic at the time. Now those are the stories and the recollections. The Rotuno sisters, many of you know the Rotuno family, had such wonderful insight coming from Fundi and talking about the Italian communities with it. And I was fortunate enough to be able to interview many in that generation. They told me the stories of what it was like. And we've got them now documented for the Historical Society. But in a twinkling of an eye, we'll all be gone. So think about the stories that you have that you would like to share. That's what the archives is all about. Now here's another one, if we look to September. And this is an interesting postcard. Where is it? What's the caption on it? It says South Millbrook, but in all likelihood, that isn't a group from South Millbrook. In all likelihood, that's a pre-printed, pre-created image that you could add the name of your community underneath. So this is still up in the air. Are they from South Millbrook, or is it a generic card that has South Millbrook scratched in underneath? Because that was the popularity. And what caused that to become successful? A camera device. A camera that printed images the same size as a postcard. So you could suddenly, in the 1890s, take your own images for postcards and have them done. So could it be South Millbrook people? Could be. Or could it be a generic one that had the name added to it?
David?
Yes.
As an old theatrical director, I'm looking at this, and I think that's a painted backdrop. That section painted, that's to be looked at carefully. You can actually see the line.
Huh?
I think, I could be wrong. but
Okay, more speculation.
That's what it is. Look at the sky.
Yes.
Just
Very good, thank you. So that's the kind of information that we're constantly looking at for the postcards and for the collections for it. So each month is a different celebration. And of course, one of the ones that is hugely popular, if you look at October, the hunt, the October hunt. So these postcards, where did the postcards go? Around the world. And what was the demise of the postcard industry? From the 1890s to about 1914, postcards were hugely popular, hugely. But two things happened. 1914, the World War I. Where were the majority of these high-quality cards printed? Germany. So suddenly, you eliminated the source. But something else happened. Bling! Telephone. You didn't need to send a postcard telling your aunt that you'd see her on Friday. You could pick up the phone, ring, ring, ring. And of course, everyone on that same phone knew that you'd be going to have a meeting on Friday.
Everybody else's business.
Everyone else's business, yes. And my aunt and uncle had a farm in Pennsylvania, and when we were young, we would go for a family reunion every year. And she had a phone, and it depended on the number of rings to know which family was being called. And my aunt would be on the phone, and she'd say, "Dottie, are you listening?" Because she could hear the breathing on the phone. These are the stories that we all have, and it's such a wonderful tradition. So postcards. Some of the other images that we have that are so special, that were also
People didn't know about party lines back.
Oh yes, and party lines. That was what everyone had. Party lines, absolutely. And other images that we inherited with this collection were individual tintypes and daguerreotypes, thank you. Individual family portraits, and individual postcards and photographs with the camera documented. So these images, often with the names on the back, that's why it's so important, become part of the legacy. And they're wonderful, wonderful ones. But in addition to that, here's something that's very, very special as well. And there's such things as the Home Oil Company, Millbrook, New York, and basically it's an address book. Remember when holidays, the different companies would produce these images? So we've got those. And also with it, which we love, and I've got them over here, buttons. Buttons that celebrate a conductor, because Charles Dunn was a railroad conductor. And his career on the railroads is documented. So we've got images of him in uniform. We also have images of the conductors lined up at the different stations with the photographs for it. And also cups that celebrate the railroad, individual holiday cups with their names and so on. And then the different buttons that went along with it. But here's an image I really love. Can you guess who that is? That's Charles Dunn. And what is he sitting on?
At the moon.
The moon. And here he is with a partner, another conductor, two men on the moon. That's normally not what would happen. But that image with the moon, that was a prop that was set up in the same little studio that this image was taken in. So you could go Front Street and have an image set up, photograph taken, and cards made with the images to celebrate. Wonderful slice of life with history. Also, we have the reliable blue uniforms, ads for what the companies he went to get the uniforms, the clothing and things that you would have to wear, the bills and stationery, back and forth, some of his receipts for jobs and where he had his assignments. All of these are images that would have been thrown out and lost. So the society has such things as letters confirming jobs, occupations, locations, some of them very formal, with the envelopes and the stamps so you know the railroad company that had hired him. More and more professional ones. But in addition to that, we have handwritten documents that show his location and what he did. So it's the whole gamut of paperwork that represented his life. And these are things that could so easily have been lost. Now they're preserved, and we're fleshing out for them. Now, my wife said, David, whatever you do, don't keep talking. So I said, okay, am I on time now? Yes, okay, just wanted to be sure. Some of the other images that we have, images like this, that would have been thrown out. There he is as a young man. Another, with that uniform that he ordered. There he is, he's all dressed up in that uniform. That is such an important element. So these represent a lifetime and a stay. Now, here's something that's really important for each of you. How many of you have postcards that you collected? A lot of you. Do you know the difference between this postcard and this postcard? The first postcards required that on the blank side is where you'd have the address. And you couldn't write anything other than the address. So it meant that what you would need to do is write on the side where the picture was. So if you had to scratch in, it would be where the picture was. That changes when the decision was made by the government to be able to divide that so you have a section for the address and a section where the comments could be written. And that date, March 1st, 1907. So if you've got a card divided, it's after 1907. If it's like this with a blank, that means it's before 1907, because that was the standard. Now, that is going to help us in terms of documenting when that image was taken. And some of them, of course, were republished over and over and over again. But that's a good rule of thumb. And if there's a comment on the back of it, and who it's addressed to, it's even more special. So all of the images that we have, these are the color ones, as I said, that we're using the calendar that are now the sepia tones, and these are images from the Dunn family. Up front, we've got the collection some of you would like to look at, so please feel free to be able to do that. And if you have any other comments or insights, share them with us.
I was just going to say, maybe you could talk a little bit about this one, considering the coronavirus.
Oh, yes.
How long that
Now, this is PR, publicity, and the spin on it. Okay, this is really interesting. Thank you, Kathy. Look to June. Yes, it's absolutely timely. Look at June. Now look at the caption of it. Nan, can you read the caption on the actual postcard?
It's Millbrook Summer School, class in ancient history, Millbrook, New York.
But the reality is something quite different. Nan?
Underneath. In the spring of 1911, an epidemic of scarlet fever broke out in the Millbrook schools. All schools were closed and fumigated. Families were quarantined if a member or relative was ill. Tents were set up on lawns, especially at the Thorne Memorial School in the village. Classes were held outside for unaffected students and faculty. There was no graduation that year. This contemporary postcard was sold at Allen's Drugstore on Franklin Avenue in the village. The caption avoided the actual reason for the exercise.
So the reality of what you see in print may not always be the truth. Just think of what we're going through right now and the issues. Schools closing, schools open, faculty, communities. What about events, concerts, music events, getting together and so on? Which ones are you going to, which ones aren't you going to? So I appreciate the fact that all of you came today to be part of this. We weren't sure how many people would be showing up. So it's a testimony to your perseverance, and I really appreciate
I was told
it.
where Alan's funeral home is right now,
Yes,
because that was the,
say it again so everyone hears you.
Say it again, Skip.
huh?
Say it again, Skip.
All right, that postcard was sold from that, where Allen Funeral Home is right now.
What was there?
The pharmacy.
The pharmacy. We had 3 pharmacies at the time. So you could go and buy generic postcards, but each of the pharmacies also underwrote the cost and had their name